Good evening, everyone. And welcome. My name is Vanessa Corby and I'm Director of the Institute for Social Justice, and a real genuine honour this evening to welcome you to Professor Vanessa Corby's inaugural lecture, which I think deserves a round of applause already. So in introducing Vanessa, she's going to talk a bit about her research, so I thought I wouldn't talk about that. Instead, talk about what she's like as a colleague. So I've known Vanessa since we both started as lecturers here in 2006, which is a very long, long time ago, in which one of the things I really learned is she hates a fuss. So we'll give her another round of applause. So one of the things that makes a place and makes me want to stay at a place like Oxford is colleagues. And it's a weird word, it's kind of dry. Colleagues like family, we don't pick, but we spend an awful lot of time with them. In my case, it's over a decade with Vanessa. It just made me think about that, about what is a colleague and what makes a great colleague, like Vanessa certainly has been for me. Great colleagues like Vanessa are inspiring. They're inspiring in their research, in their teaching, in the commitment they have to their students and their job, but they do it in a way that is very human, that is humble and is authentic. And I think it's not a coincidence that Vanessa's received flowers and letters and emails and texts from ex-students congratulating her on this event. So colleagues are inspiring. Colleagues act as mentors, so the people you can go to tell you the truth when you make mistakes, to give you advice, to give you feedback. And certainly Vanessa and I have done that for each other, and she's done for me, mainly over cake over the last several years. More recently, pizza at the block down Goodrum Gate, but mainly cake. And colleagues are also friends. As I said, you spend a lot of time with them, and they're what makes an institution human, they're what gives it life. And in being Vanessa's friend over that time, I've been invited to her wedding and learned why it's really important that wedding dresses have pockets in. And I've heard a lot about her family, and particularly about Seth, with whom Seth, I can tell you, she is really proud of you. And I think this evening, you should be really, really proud of Vanessa as well. So, just to close, in becoming a professor, one of the criteria that being a professor is not being a great colleague. Unfortunately, that isn't in the criteria, but I think to be a great colleague, to be a great professor, you should also be a great colleague. You should be someone who is giving, who is humble, who is human, who's authentic, and Vanessa is absolutely all of those things, as I think we'll hear about in her talk in a moment. So what I'd like to do is another round of applause and maybe some foot stamping as well, because that will really embarrass her.
Oh boy. See, I should have said, don't make me cry in the introduction, because then it'll all be downhill from then on. Welcome everybody. I am absolutely overwhelmed. I don't know how I'm going to get through the next 40 minutes. When I put the professorial application in on the 31st of May 2001, and Seth was there to help me to press the submit button, and Michael was there in the camera to record this momentous event. You know, it's 5,000 word, hideous thing. I'm warning anybody who's going to put in for it. It's a real hill of pain. The key consolation I thought about was, if I don't get this, at least I won't have to do the inaugural lecture. So that went well, didn't it? And the reason why I've been worrying about this now for a year is because this is an incredible privilege. It's an incredible responsibility to have a platform like this and have a captive audience like this. And it's so wonderful to see people here who I've not seen for 5 years, 6 years, maybe 7. People who've been my friends through thick and thin, my colleagues who I bribed to put up with me by bringing cake to RDC, and my students, because, sweethearts, you have to put up with this all the time. You know, so the fact that you've come here tonight when it's dark and it's cold and you could be nice and wrapped up watching Netflix. I'm really touched, I really am. So, my title. So my title, If Only You Weren't Such a Social Animal, that was designed to be a bridge between some anecdotes and my new book that I've slowly been writing in bits and bobs here and there, because I thought a year ago, oh yeah, I'll be able to talk about the new book by then, it'll be done. Yeah, sure. And the thing was that when term started, I found myself saying to students that, particularly the first years, the thing that you need to grasp is that yes, you are here at an institution, higher education institution, and we are going to stretch you, we're going to give you new things to read, we're going to show you things that you're going to find challenging and you're going to find difficult. But the purpose of that is not for us to just fill you with stuff, so that then we create a series of mini-me's who'll go off into the world in our own image. The purpose of that is so that you can then use your lived experience, and then you can look at all the discourses and all the ideas and all the politics and everything that we talk to you about, and you can read that with your own life. And that you can critique existing power structures through your practices, through your writings. And I started to really think about this idea of, well, how can I, use the inaugural as a platform, basically, to kind of talk to the students and help them to understand what I meant by the value of the experience that you bring with you. So that's when I had the idea to do what I'm going to do tonight. So apologies, not what was advertised, a slight tweak on that. So in order to do that, I'm going to take you back to Barnsley College. Okay, Barnsley College in 1991, when I was completing my major project. And as you could see, even by the tender age of 18, I was already obsessed with stuff, with matter. This thing that I made, it was part of a big project where I was really interested in the physicality of your body, and I was really interested in the physicality of aging. And so I was there in the sculpture studios mashing together sawdust and really crappy tempera paints and all kinds of things. And I was absolutely running the art school playbook, okay? It's like, oh, I'm going to think about life, the universe and the fragility of being. What shall I do? I'll wrap rubber bands around my head and that will work. Okay, so that's what we're doing. And I had a wonderful tutor, a guy called Steve West. He's a very well-respected sculptor, and his daughter Liz West is an internationally renowned artist. And Steve decided that he needed to sit me down and have a bit of a chat with me. Because, surprise, surprise, even when I was 18 years old, I was still a bit of a chatterbox. Okay. And so he sat me down and he said, Vanessa, you could really make something of yourself if only you weren't such a social animal. So, and I fully understand that this was coming from a very kindly meant place. He really wanted me to kind of apply myself. I was just about to go off to university, and he felt that I needed kind of, a little bit of guidance. And of course, me being me, I kind of unpack that little bit of advice which has stuck in my head for the past 30 odd years. Because it says two things. It says that in order to create great things, we have to remove ourselves from our social relationships because we need time. And that means that in lots of ways, that means that making things, writing things is a solitary activity of an individual, of a discrete subject. So that's one thing. And the other thing that says is that education is a ladder. So if I wasn't something already, what was I? And Diane Rie, whose writing on education has been so incredibly powerful for me, she talks about the problem of this kind of idea of social mobility. The idea that it's something which is freeing, the idea that it's something enabling. But it's also the idea that in order to be equal, your parents and where you come from isn't enough already. That you've got to be something different. And those two ideas are absolutely fundamental to so much of the research that I have created for the past 20 years. And of course, I'm stood on this platform because I'm a social being. Okay? Because, yeah, you get plugs. Because of the amazing support that I have had. And, you know, I'm already worrying about time. And I wanted to try and put that in place. That the reason why I'm here isn't just because I worked hard, because I have worked hard. Michael will tell you sometimes I work too hard. But, you know, it's because of the opportunities that have been created because of the relationships that I've had. So kind of, you know, first up would be Joanne Fletcher, Kate and her dad here today, who's Joanne's dad and Joanne's sister. So when I was growing up in Barnsley, the only person I knew who was going to university was Joanne. And Kate and I would be in Kate's bedroom making obstacle courses for a hamster, and Joanne would be upstairs listening to AC/DC really loud and utterly terrified me. But she told me the story of how when she was 8 she wanted to be an Egyptologist, and a teacher told her it was a stupid idea, and she dug in. And that was an incredibly important message for me. Virginia Bodman, who taught me painting in my undergraduate degree, incredibly powerful, forthright, feminist, and my first ever tutor who was a woman, obviously Griselda, who in a supervision, and I've told the students this a lot, in a supervision sat me down and said, "Right then, Vanessa, I'm going to teach you how to write. Now, a sentence requires a subject and a verb." Okay. And, you know, everything I learned about historical analysis, how to use theory to help disentangle the complexity of practice without closing it down, comes from Griselda. Alison, who was the year above me, and I kind of just constantly was in awe of her, because she's quite possibly one of the most intelligent women I've ever met, and who right from the get-go was not afraid to talk about the lived experience of class in that setting. And that was incredibly enabling, because that gave me permission to be there in a Russell institution. Sorry, drink of water. And on that note, that was kind of also supported by Ben Reid, the son of the late great Sir Herbert Reid. Ben knew that I was a fish out of water and he took me under his wing. I was a Yorkshire lass that he was looking after, as he puts it. And then, last but not least, Steve Baker, who we could say that tonight is all his fault, because he gave me my first fixed-term contract job up at UCLan in 2005, and was also my mentor for my professorial application. So I wouldn't be here without them, all of them. And I wanted to put that in place. Again, thinking about this thing, you know, I'm not a discrete subject. I kind of, you know, send out these little tendrils into the world. But also, the reason why I am so passionate about art practice, the reason why I get up feeling excited because I'm going to go and teach Heidegger on a Tuesday, goes before that. Okay, and this is one of the things that I really wanted to kind of talk to the students about. So it has everything to do with where I grew up. And I grew up in a village up until the age of 11 called Dodworth, which is about 45 miles away, a couple of miles outside outside Barnsley. And as you can see from this beautiful map, it's awfully hilly. And I did think, you know, how can I talk about Dodworth and what it's like and what it means to me? And I did have this harebrained scheme about going to Dodworth and taking lots of photographs. And then I realised that I'd only really be able to have one photograph on the screen, and that would only be one hill. And no matter where you go in Dodworth, you are walking uphill, okay? Because it's absolutely all over the place. As my granddad used to say, he was kind of moaning as he would walk up, ooh, my little button's not working, this hill here, which is called Stainborough Low, with usual kind of Barnsley wit and sarcasm. You know, used to say, it's uphill down here. And those hills and that landscape is the first layer in my kind of aesthetic sensibility. Herbert Reed in To Hell with Culture. It sounds like a book which is saying that he doesn't want anything to do with art. It's not that. He says it's basically saying he doesn't want anything to do with art under capitalism. Because he says under capitalism we've got a system where art lives in galleries and museums, and you have a divide between those who engage with it and those who don't, and it's retained for the elite. So what you have is, you don't have a truly democratic society where people can make things and can feel valued for the things that they make coming from the ground up. Instead, you have a kind of a stale fish of culture with a rather nasty sauce on top. And so Herbert Reed talks about the way that his aesthetic sensibility came from the landscape, the seasons, and also being uprooted and moving to Leeds also at the age of 11. And so the kind of, firstly the kind of the physicality of being in that village. I wanted to go to my grandma's, it was up the hill and down the hill and up the hill again. It's a kind of a space that you feel with your whole body. Okay, it's kind of in terms of that kind of making you alive to the kind of the phenomenology of space. But the other reason why it kind of has a particular significance, I can kind of try and articulate and legitimate in this very kind of academic setting through this. Now, this is a book which is by a Canadian social anthropologist called Professor Kate Degnan, which she's based at Newcastle University, and it is a book about Dodworth. She carried out her doctoral fieldwork in Dodworth, and what she was really interested in is what she called the life world of the village. Because of its topography and the micro communities that kind of clustered around certain hilltops and certain valleys, and because of the close-knit, terribly gossip-related kind of community, which was, when she was doing her fieldwork, there's only about 3,000 people living in the village. Everybody knew everybody. And because of the way that she was interested in that it was a mining community that, you know, defined the kind of the representation of working men and women at home. All the women worked. All of them were incredibly stoic, forthright, strong women. And what fascinated her above all was the way that this was all bound together in this thing called memory talk. And through the memory talk, the figures from the past of the village and the figures of the present kind of came together. It was kind of like, you know, it was a really good kind of basis for thinking about the beside time of trauma, because the self was constituted through these figures and this landscape of the past. Now that was really important for me because I come from quite a small family. And my mum, there she is, Maureen Summers, that's her in 1958 when she was 22. My mum had me quite late in life. She was 36 when she had me, which is really late for 1972. And my granddad had passed away in 1956. So the only way that I knew my granddad was through this and 2 other photographs and the landscape of the village, because I would walk the fields with her that she had walked with him when they'd gone mushrooming at 5 in the morning while rationing was still on, and he needed to find a bit more food to help feed my mum and her 2 sisters. You know, I used to walk the same hills. My mum used to talk about the way that my granddad used to love to take the mickey out of her because she was deeply religious. She was a very devoted Christian. And my granddad used to say to her she was the only person in the village who went to the church more than the vicar. And finally, she loved the way that he would describe where they lived and give directions to people who needed to find the top of Dogworth Bottom. And so through these kind of narratives, through these stories and through this landscape, I kind of came to learn that language was a thing that you could play with. And it made me attentive to the kind of the vibrant nature of matter and the physicality of space and its capacity to kind of hold the traces of beings who are long gone. And through that, I kind of started to kind of create some kind of sense of the way that materials have a physicality that is somehow affirmative of being. That engaging with the physicality of the world is somehow a testament that you are here, that you exist. So that carried through to my research. It's like this kind of deep-seated conviction that I've got, where one of the things that I'm absolutely fascinated by, and it absolutely is borne out by the beautiful kind of specificity of Kate Degnan's book, is the specificity of place, the specificity of history, and how important that is for us to try and understand the complexity of how artworks come into being, and then what their effects are once they exist. What do they do? Not what do they mean? I hate that question. Oh, what does it mean? It's what does it do? So that kind of locus of the village and its relationships was absolutely fundamental to my sense of you don't make things alone, you don't create, your sense of self doesn't emerge discreetly. It's absolutely about being embedded in the social relations that surround you. And that probably sounds like I'm giving you a huge dump of working class nostalgia, okay? And that's not the case, because there's a kind of, certainly for me, there's a kind of ambivalence about place and ambivalence about my relationship to the village. And that kind of comes through, its effect in my work has been my attentiveness to the way that differences come together. So the way that difference is interstitial. So in my work on Eva Hesse, I was really interested in the way that she wasn't just an artist who was a woman working in America. She was an artist who was a woman who was also a German Jewish refugee working in America. And what does it mean if we actually imagine that as a kind of a context out of which the work emerged? And so that comes from my awareness of being working class and being a woman, and how those things come together. And that comes from my watching my mum and her disappointment from when she was without it sounding horrible. So my mother passed the 11 plus, and within my family there was a kind of a rift, a kind of a class line rift along the lines of education, because like Raymond Williams says, you climb the ladder but you climb alone. My mother's sisters hadn't passed the 11 plus. My mum went to the girls' high school. And when my mum got to the end of being at the girls' high school, my granddad wanted her to go to college. But my grandmother did not. And my grandmother said, the tin factory was good enough for me, it's good enough for her. And so my mum failed her exams on purpose to stop my grandparents rowing. And so that kind of awareness of class and the complexities of place and gender, that kind of carries through everything I do. So, let me just have a bit. So, just for a minute, I'm going to take you through, I'm going to take you quickly through some research that I carried out, which is absolutely about denying this idea of the discrete subject. And having that kind of intuitive interest in the affirmation of being, one of the stupid things that I decided to do was to take on the paradigm case of that. The kind of the paradigm case for the pathologization of art practice and being itself. And that comes through the work of Robert Smithson, who made an incredibly famous piece of work called Spiral Jetty, which has three forms. It's a sculpture, it's a text, and it's a film. And Spiral Jetty was his attempt to make what he called a remote monument. In the 1960s, he said that art was becoming a bit like a discotheque. And he wanted to do something which was also about the process of making and materials, which is one of the reasons why I was interested in it. So he was kind of really interested in what he called the time of the artist. And so he had a series of sources that were helping him to think about the relationship between time and monuments, and time and the artist. And one of the things that he liked about thinking about materials and process was the way that the boundaries between the artist and the materials disappeared. It's a process that he referred to through the writing of somebody called Anton Ehrenzweig as de-differentiation. And he paired that in his source material with the writing of Sigmund Freud and his text, Civilization and Its Discontent. And in that text, it's really interesting, Freud talks about the way that civilization is always on the brink of its destruction. Because we're not nice to each other because that's in our human nature. We're actually, only religion makes us nice to one another. And Smithson was really interested in this idea of disintegrating civilizations. It was the middle of the Vietnam War. At the time that he was making Spiral Jetty, he'd been an artist in residence at Kent State University in the February. He was making Spiral Jetty in the April, and then of course the National Guard opened fire on the students at Kent State in the May of that year, on the 4th. And so for Smithson, he felt like art was in a political whirlpool. The activity was futile and the world was on the point of destroying itself. And he looked to things like ancient Egypt as a kind of a model of disintegrating civilizations. And all this was bound up in this work, Spiral Jetty. So Freud's text is absolutely about this idea of the discrete subject. That we need to, in order to remain kind of in a state of calm, we need to push away those people who will thwart our happiness with their needs and their desires. And he felt that, not only this, but it was the idea that we were pushing these social relationships away, this kind of fundamental hostility that made us human, is because it went back to our kind of archaic primal animality. And so our historians who were looking at Smithson, looking at the source material, started to really think about how this work was about destruction. It was about the kind of the annihilation of the artist subject. And give me a minute. Lost my train of thought. I do this in lectures all the time. So art historians latched on to the fact that the work had been submerged. This work's located on the Great Salt Lake in Utah, and in about 1975 the lake rose and the work disappeared from visibility. And so the idea that the work wasn't visible anymore became this idea that it's a great lost object, and it's this wonderful embodiment of the fact that we're all doomed and life is pointless and we should just all end it all now, okay? So the thing is, while our historians were writing this, nobody had bothered to notice that actually the spiral jetty had re-emerged. And this is kind of one of the things that drives my research, is the way that art history sometimes gets so enamoured with ideas. It goes off on these wonderful little kind of forays, and the actual thing itself is sat there going, "Aye, remember me?" And it's by interrogating the materials that we get new sense of the work and the world, and also the power structures that kind of dictate what we can say about them and when we can say it. So I did a really simple thing. I said, I want to look at the physicality of the work. And instead of this all being about somebody who rejects the world and it's all going to be oblivion and misery, I said, okay, so actually you couldn't make that work without cooperation. Because Robert Smithson is not a structural engineer, and that is a salt bed, and that caterpillar driver saved the whole project when the caterpillar almost completely sank in the lake. So the thing is that you can't follow the theoretical logic of what is said about the jetty if you take notice of how it was made. And the thing is that Robert Smithson talked about all of that. He talked about all the people that helped him find the site, but art history kind of wrote that off as pedestrian detail. And the thing that, of course, interests me, coming from my background and questions of class, is that the labour that is written off in that is the manual labour. It's the classed labour that gets written off and invisible. Now, participatory interlude. So, you were all given a post-it note. Now, I'm going to do with you what I do with the students. And just to give you a little bit of explainer, I'm always trying to convince the students that they know more than they think they do, and they notice more things than they think they do. So what I do is I give them an exercise called Say What You See. And I ask you to look at a work completely cold and tell me what you think. So this is the really risky bit, okay? Not the bit when my brain went blank 5 minutes ago. This is the really risky bit, because I've no idea what you're going to say about what I'm going to show you. So I've got a backup plan, which is me reading what I wrote about it, but I'm hoping we'll have a really nice discussion instead. Okay. So, are you ready? Okay. Right. So, I'm going to give you 2 minutes to scribble down anything you might think. You two are not allowed. Just saying. So scribble down just what you see, and then you can pass it to the ends, and my little helpers will hopefully gather these things. Seth, have you not brought a pen?
No, I'm just going to go and play with it.
It's alright, it's not a test, there's no wrong answers. Okay, so when you've done, just pass it down to the end. And Wendy and Amy, if you could be my little helpers, that would be awesome. Either way, okay? Are we going to run over? Will I get shot? Okay. Just a shot. Pieces of paper. Thank you for this. So I've just written a book chapter which is about, thank you very much, about teaching the history of art to art students from working class communities. And this piece of work is the first piece of work that I talk about. So I'm hoping that that's going to be, at the moment that's a smaller thing of something that's going to become a bigger thing, because it was actually the inspiration for a project that I'm working on with Helen Phoebe from Yorkshire Sculpture Park, which I'm hoping is going to turn into an exhibition. So all of these will be really useful. So I have got figures, nudes, layers, textures, what else have I got? King, castle, person in dress, what else have I got? See, this might not work, you know. Curse words, female organs, exploration of gender, handmade use of textiles, discussion of the monarchy. What else have we got? I've got too many post-it notes. Cardboard, clutter, colours, pieces of installation. Lots of people picking up on female genitalia. Right, so a group of people. Silhouettes of figures, canvases on the walls, setup is lit in shadows of the objects. Absolutely, it's like a theatre set, and there's a good reason for that. So, it's interesting. I'll just do one more, because I'm struggling to read them. Set design, there we go. Voids, colours, and no, lost it. Right. Okay. Now, body, I'm going to leave it with this one. Bodies, order, disorder, hierarchy, subordination, exploitation. Nice. This is why I do this. So, I'm going to try and keep this short and sweet because Matthew's going to tell me off for talking too much. What a surprise, I run over. So the work that I've just shown you is a work called A Fashionable Marriage, which was made by Labana Image in 1984-1986. And it's a kind of a witty reworking of this, which is Hogarth's Marriage à la Mode, which is a kind of a critique of the public propriety that the aristocracy liked to kind of represent themselves as, but the private immorality. So here we have a mistress and her lover in her boudoir. So Hogarth's work is absolutely a kind of a critique of class. And when I saw this work in the summer in Tate Modern, this was the thing that I saw. Okay. And I eagerly went off, bought the catalogue, like you do. You want to take the work home with you, but you can't. So you buy the catalogue or the postcard instead. And I read the catalogue, and I was incredibly mindful of the thing that the discussion of the fashionable marriage talked about was questions about race and gender and the art world and the toxicity of it in the 1980s. But at no point did it talk about Maggie Thatcher in a miner's helmet in Wistow Colliery in 1980, slap bang in the middle of the work. And for me, it was this absolute kind of lightning moment where I was just sat went back in the exhibition and just sat scribbling and writing. And this was while I was working on the book chapter, really struggling over the summer. And I got back and I immediately emailed Margaret, who is the editor for the book, which is all about epistemic justice. I said, I've got this thing, now I've got the way to start. And I was when I was reading the work, and then I was reading the catalogue, and I thought, okay, so nobody's talking about this. Why is nobody talking about class now? Why do we have a discussion of an artwork which was made in 1984 and 86 at the time of the miners' strike, but class is not visible in that critique? And it set me thinking about the neoliberal culture in which we live and the tragic polarisation of the privations of the working class and its separation from racial politics. And I had this kind of epiphany moment where I suddenly thought that Labana Hamid's work was opening up a space where I could talk about the global capitalism and the way that we have a kind of a bifurcation of race and class, but actually what we need to do is think about the relationship, again, going back to this thing about social relationships, the relationship between the discrimination that we see through Brexit and the kind of against the working class after Brexit as being racist. We need to see the kind of polarisation of the interests of the right and the left as actually bound up, as Zygmunt Bauman kind of articulates it, what happens in one place happens in the other. That these things aren't, how can we use art practice, how can we use exhibitions, how can we create a space where we try to join the dots again between the discrimination against these two groups. Sorry, I didn't articulate that very well. Kind of worried about running out of time. So, what have I done? What have I talked about? I've tried to talk about the way that, I have a brilliant job. I get to come to work and talk about painting first thing on a Monday morning. What's not to like? That there is an incredibly affirmatory power and potential in art practice. Sometimes that gets pathologized by these kind of ideas that artists are these tragic creatures who live on the margins of society and they're not really interested in the world, and that's rubbish. I wanted to kind of show you that my route to being studier today isn't really a traditional route. That, you know, I'd never set foot in a gallery till I was 16. I didn't grow up with lots of books in the house, and I kind of almost got to university by mistake, by doing lots of drawing on a Saturday and you know, drawing recastly for 8 hours. Seriously I do. And in doing that, what I wanted to do is kind of give permission to my students who might feel that, you know, this is a strange place to be in. And you know, I kind of side with Melvin Bragg. Always describes himself as a bit of a class mongrel, and I agree with him. So that's exactly how I feel. I don't really belong in one place. I don't really belong in the other either. So I kind of done that in the spirit of we're all social animals, and hopefully, who knows, my students, you know, we've got 3 generations here between Griselda and myself, and you don't. So I'm hoping that you're going to go on and teach and carry on that affirmative legacy. Thank you.
Thank you, Vanessa. So you run over, but I think we have some time for some questions. So we'd very much like to have questions from all the different generations of art historians and art researchers in the room. And we have microphones on either side, and I will talk inanely until someone puts their hands up and asks a question. Right, done, thank you.
Hey, Kate Cat.
What's lecture? Like, what made you jump into lecturing?
I don't think there was ever any jumping. It's one of those really strange things where I never planned this career. But I found that, so when I was doing my undergraduate degree, I started to discover that I wasn't actually that bad at writing. And I got to the end of my undergrad and I was doing quite well, so I decided I wanted to do postgrad. And then that was the momentous moment when Griselda interviewed me and she said to me, "And then Vanessa, I'm quite happy to have you on the course." And I was utterly stunned and walked out of the room in it was when we were in the old mining building, thinking that I'd completely misunderstood. And then I got my acceptance letter in the post and I thought, no, there's no way that this is happening. And I was convinced I'd get another letter saying, "Oh, terribly sorry, we've made a mistake." And so then when I did the masters, there was this fabulous masters that Griselda set up called Mayfen, which was the masters in feminism and the visual arts, and Alison was on the first year and I was on the second year cohort. And then through doing that, I started writing more and more. And the first essay I did really well on was Eva Hesse. That then led to a dissertation. That then led to a PhD, which then led to teaching. So it was never, I woke up one morning and I was like, yes, I want to be an academic. Yeah, it was kind of I kind of did it by mistake.
What would your 16-year-old self tell you now?
Oh, God. I was actually thinking a little bit about this. I'm not quite my 16-year-old self, but I was talking to a student this morning about it. I was remembering when I was doing my PhD at Leeds, and it's kind of weird because when I was growing up in Barnsley and Dodworth, everybody thought I was posh. And then I went to Leeds and I realised I wasn't posh at all. And I became really conscious of my voice and my accent. And this led me to absolutely stop speaking. So I ended up in counselling for about 3 months because I couldn't speak in seminars. And I think I'd probably try to tell myself not to worry quite so much. I'd probably try and tell myself to be a bit kinder to myself, which, considering the lack of sleep that I've had this week running up to this and how mad I've driven Michael the past few days, you know, is a bit rich, because I'm still not very good at listening to good advice. It's that thing where, you know, you're much kinder to your friends than you are to yourself. So I'd say, yeah, try and be a bit kinder.
Hi, I'm Kate McLavin. In one of my jobs, I work for the National Society of Art and Design, and I'm working on a piece decolonising art curriculums, and it's for art educators to interrogate the work that they do and teach, so that, you know, we can stop perpetuating problematic cycles. What do you think that educators or people who are interested in art can do to interrogate artists that they share, or is there a version of looking into class that is equivalent to decolonising curriculums, do you think?
I mean, I think in lots of ways that's the thing that I've just been writing, and I think the thing that we've got to do is examine the curriculum and the recruitment practices and think about where is the discrimination which is systematic. The art history curriculum, I think, is a really interesting one, in that so much of the kind of the teachings of aesthetics and formalism is about a kind of a purity, a pureness, which is actually very kind of white, Western and middle class. So what you've got to do is kind of look at when things have been othered and marginalised because of those criteria, and then try and bring them back in. That I think it's about, again, trying to think about how difference is interstitial. One of the kind of the key difficulties we've had is the way that I think identity politics kind of siloed lots of difference. And then, of course, we have discussions about intersectionality, but then that becomes, the water around that becomes quite muddied, because it kind of started in a kind of, you know, kind of Black American kind of idea about a term to be used, and then then even the kind of the terminology becomes problematic. So I kind of go with this idea of interstitial difference, because that kind of comes through to Tim Ingold in a beautiful paper that he wrote in 2017 called On Human Correspondence, and it's less confrontational, if that makes sense. It's less kind of positional. It's more thinking about the kind of the fluxes and the flows of difference and how they can have cumulative effects, I guess. If that makes sense.
Thank you.
Yeah.
If you give your students a piece of advice that they would take on for the rest of their life, what would it be?
Oh God, no pressure. Oh, blimey. Can I have a minute to think about that? That's hard. Have you got an answer for that?
Do they have to take the advice?
Because your title was based on something your teacher said to you,
Yeah.
and you kept that with you all this time.
I did.
If there's something you wanted them to take on positively?
For me,
There's probably lots of advice that you've been given you haven't taken on as well as the comments you have.
well, I mean, and the thing is though, Steve's advice, while it was kindly meant, it kind of was problematic. So I'm kind of thinking I don't want to, say something that's going to scar you guys for life in the next 30 years. So I think it would have to be that you realise that you're not on your own, that you have friends, family, people who you will work with, who will be incredibly important for supporting you through what you do. Never retreat. Never kind of make your world shrink because you feel you can't do something. Never put up. Never stop doing something like this because you're absolutely terrified out of your tiny mind and all you're thinking about is going home and hugging your dog. Okay, don't let your fear get in the way, and don't turn your back on the people who can help you.
Thanks very much. A bit more applauding and a bit more foot stomping while I get something from the rooms.